I think it is harmful for the trans athletes to be told, like, if they identify as male, that they are not male.
Yeah.
And so I see that.
You just said male.
Uh-huh.
That's sex. That's not gender.
Oh, sorry. Whatever is the gender
No, you
term.
can't keep it straight, can you?
I mean, it's I will listen.
Because it's silly. It's a little silly, isn't it? It's time for another installment of Change My Mind, the series where we rationalize our positions on controversial topics. Now, today's subject is a hot one in the news lately: biological males in women's sports.
A Victoria woman who won a world championship in master cycling has been hit with a wave of backlash because she is transgender.
New Zealand has chosen the first transgender athlete to compete at its Olympic Games. It's also reignited a debate with critics who say it's unfair.
Transgender swimmer Leah Thomas breaking barriers and records. Sports Illustrated calls the college senior the most controversial athlete in America.
The beauty of Change My Mind is that almost invariably, productive dialogue takes place, and people generally leave feeling better than they came, which is exactly what happened here. But not everyone from the tolerant activist left was so happy about, conversation. What's the message of radical trans liberation now? What does it mean?
I'm not here to talk to you, Steven.
No? No one? Radical trans liberation now? Look! I'm slightly chocolatey! This one's still a mystery to me. We're still trying to identify the gender. Is it male, female, Z-male, trigender? Either way, I was greatly inconvenienced. If you figure it out, comment below. The point is, some people just don't know how to use their words. Unlike this person, Isaac, with whom I had a conversation that was a little more productive. Isaac, Steven, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
So, Isaac, I don't know. I know you said you've watched the show.
Yes.
Okay. So I don't know how familiar you are kind of with this, but the idea is that we, sit down with people, hopefully where it's a rational discussion on what are sort of controversial topics. And often people have rational discussions, on topics that are, okay, it's easy to have a rational discussion, or it's easy to rationalize your position. The second it gets into something that may be emotionally charged, we throw it out the window. Yeah. So that's what it is in the bottom line. Today's topic, I do not believe that biological males should be allowed to compete in women's sports. Obviously, you disagree to some degree.
Yes.
Feel free to make your case and change my mind.
Okay. I guess my first point of contention would be with the wording of the statement.
Okay.
Biological males should not compete. I'm curious as to why it would be biological males and not trans women should not compete, because I feel like there is a distinction there, even if it is, maybe an arbitrary one in your case.
Well, how is it not arbitrary?
How is it not? Oh, you mean the distinction between trans? Yeah.
So when you say that, for example, I could use either term interchangeably.
Yeah.
Biological males is something that everyone would understand.
Yeah.
So why is it so important to you that terminology be changed?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I feel like a lot of the times people use biology as this sort of constant, obviously I'm sure you believe, maybe I'm wrong, that biology, it's a binary and that there's male and female and that it's just like that. Is that correct? And that you can be one or the other, and that there's no...
As a general rule, there are obviously radical exceptions to the rule, like intersex
sure.
people or people with, androgen resistance or stuff, but we're talking about, 0.01% of the population. So yes, obviously, and obviously even people who believe in the transgender ideology have long agreed that biology exists in a binary.
Oh, for sure.
And not gender, but biology.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Okay. So if we agree that biological sex is, or at least, would you agree with my presumption here that certainly what's being taught on school is that gender and sex are different, and the primary difference is sex is biological and gender is societal?
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Okay, all right. So sorry, continue with your point as to why you would prefer it be worded with trans women versus biological males.
Because I do believe that as far as expression goes, obviously there is that difference that you're talking about. And even in trans women, a lot of them who do compete, in sports, there is obviously the hormonal, like, you know, estrogen and like all the like treatment that they go through, which does alter their physical sort of like ability to compete in these sports. And so to say biological men instead of trans women sort of indicates that there is no difference, when I think there probably is.
Actually,
you know, if
no,
minor.
I would argue, maybe I'm misunderstanding your point, because
Yeah.
you just said that gender is societal,
Yeah,
sex is biological.
yeah,
So the reason that I am saying is biological males
Yeah.
is because this is biological, right?
Yeah.
Males.
Yeah.
But then you're saying you would rather see trans women, which is societal. It's not biological. Sports are separated by biology.
Okay.
That's why there are male-female divisions.
Yes.
And up until recently, male-female divisions, men's and women's divisions, they were always separated by
Yeah.
biology. And you're suggesting that it would be more conducive to an accurate assessment here by using a gendered term rather than biological.
Okay, I see your point now. Yes. So I would concede to you on that. As far as like the distinction, I'm fine with the wording if that is sort of your, you know.
Well, I want to understand
Yeah.
your position, because you
Yes.
just said that gender and sex are different.
Yes.
And my issue is with, I don't care if someone wants to identify.
Yeah.
Right? If they want to identify as a woman
Yeah.
in society,
Yeah.
that's a totally separate issue. We're
Yeah.
talking about sports, which have been separated by biological sex.
Okay, I see what you're saying.
We're
yes.
talking about biological males who are
Yes.
now
Okay.
dominating
Yeah.
biological females.
Okay, so my point of contention with what you just said there would be that biological males are dominating biological females. I have not seen that play out. Obviously, there's a few cases here and there, but I could easily just make the argument that Leah Thomas came in 8th in one of her races and came in 5th in another one. And so I would just
set
ask,
the record in one.
Yes,
And
for
set
sure.
the record with a time that would have ranked not even in the top 500.
Yeah,
Right, not even the top 500 male rankings.
Yeah.
For the 500 meter, not even the top 800 for the 200 meter, which I believe is what Leah Thomas won.
you're saying the record he set when he was
The
racing
record that
women
he set is a race with women, yeah,
would not even
rank in
register.
the top 500 with
And
men.
how does that further your point?
Well, the point is this is someone who was competing as a male,
Yes.
was a middling to low end of the pack
Yes.
male,
Yes.
and is now a champion female.
My argument to that would just be that the reason why he was middle of the pack was because he was on hormones, and
No,
because
no,
he
not
had already
before.
he had begun to transition while he was competing against men, as far as I was aware.
No, and certainly, and if you would argue that, it would certainly only be at the tail end, not for the entirety of his athletic career.
No, not from the entirety.
Right.
But when you're looking at those middle of the pack numbers, I believe, and obviously it's just your word against my word, so
Right, I understand.
I'm not gonna like stay on this point.
No, and I appreciate it.
Yeah,
and,
yeah.
and I try and make all the references publicly available, so
Sure.
when this goes up,
Yeah. Yeah.
because I can just easily get something wrong. For example, I could be mixing up the 200 and 500 meter.
Right,
And
yeah.
I know that he won one of them.
And it's kind
then
of
he
you're
was-
missing the forest for the trees if
Right.
you want to get caught up in
Yeah,
that,
exactly.
so-
Because there are many, many examples of biological males dominating biological females. You know, there are over 80 examples of women who either lost out on opportunities or scholarships. You have Mary Gregory, I believe, in powerlifting. You have women cycling, a record that was set. You have examples across the board in weightlifting, in cycling, in swimming, in track.
Yeah.
Not to mention combat sports where women can actually be physically harmed. So
Yeah.
it has happened quite a bit. Now, granted, it's such a small percentage of the population.
Sure.
What I want to avoid is, and I mean this genuinely, I'm not just blowing smoke, you seem like a sharp guy, you know, that intellectual fallacy of appeal to novelty, right? That argumentum ad novitatum is what they'll call it, but appeal to novelty, which means, well, since we haven't done it yet, therefore there are no consequences. Well, it's just because we haven't done it yet. This is very, very new. And where we have implemented these types of policies, we've seen an unbelievable differential between the biological males and women.
Okay.
It's just we've only been doing this for a few years. It's
Yeah.
like saying, well, there are no negative consequences to a 90% income tax yet.
Sure.
But if we implement it tomorrow and it takes 5 years to see all the bankruptcies,
Right.
it's not really an argument. So
Yeah.
where we have implemented it, we have seen quite a few examples.
Okay.
But it is on a smaller scale because
Sure.
it would have been considered absurd 5 years ago.
And it's hard for me to contextualize that 80 number that you gave because I do not know what the total is. So
Yeah.
it's like it's a hard number rather than a percentage. So it's hard for me to take that at face value. Just
Well,
for
even
that
then,
reason.
let's say it's not that much.
Yeah.
Okay, it's still more than one.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
And then we can get to my issues. You know, for example, you mentioned hormones. So I want to make sure that I understand this because I think you're actually arguing what a lot of people argue, and I can understand why people would think this way.
Yeah.
That if a a biological male undergoes hormone replacement, that they no longer would have the biological advantages inferred?
I'm not necessarily saying that. Obviously, that
Okay.
is the majority, but
Okay.
it's obviously not in every case.
So
situation.
if someone did not undergo hormone replacement therapy at all, you would be against them competing against women?
I actually don't know. It's a very
then why bring it up?
nuanced situation. Oh, just because as far as
Because you brought that up as one of the first things.
Yes, just in the case of these people are just dominating and whatever, and in the
They
case of Leah Thomas competing against men, it was more so just to say that he was competing against men while he was on hormones. But my greater sort of, because you do bring up a good point, which is that it is more than one,
Right.
who is going to be harmed, and I don't think in my mind there's a perfect answer to this sort of, because in my mind there's a couple different options. It's either you
Okay, like what?
exclude transgender people entirely from competing.
And that's not what I'm suggesting.
And yeah,
No.
totally. I don't think
They just compete with
yeah.
their biological sex.
Right. Yeah. So, and then there is the other option of letting them compete with their biological sex. I believe you do run into the same problems, which is that if you are to let biological women compete with transgender men who were once women, you're essentially pitting women against, in your mind, other women who are just basically doping legally because they're on hormones or they're taking some sort of testosterone or something like that. So you run into the same problem when they're competing against who they were assigned, what their gender was biologically at birth. You see what I'm saying?
Are you saying a biological woman competing
against a trans man who was previously a woman?
Hold on a second. Let's just stick with the term biology here because using gender terms. So a biological woman competing against a biological
woman, yes, who is on
steroids.
Yeah, or or testosterone.
Yeah,
which would improve their performance.
Right.
Yeah. So it runs into the same problem in my sense.
Which is exactly what we're allowing with the trans athletes. So the reason I bring that up is because I don't know if you know this, but the International Olympic Committee doesn't require any hormone replacement therapy at all.
Okay.
None. And what happened with Leah Thomas, and this was shocking to me, was now a big reason that the IOC does that is they say, well, we punt it to the organizations of the individual sports. And you and I both know, of course, being on campus, I think you're probably to the left of center, but I don't think you're someone who believes in stifling speech or ideas or shutting people down.
That would be a bad thing. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. But we both know that smaller sports organizations are more prone to succumbing to the pressure of activist groups, right? So the IOC says, well, punt it to these organizations. With the NCAA, what happened, and I'm just using this because it's the most recent example.
Yeah.
What happened is the NCAA had rules. They said, we're going to go up to the national swimming organizing body. I believe it's USA Swimming. I may have that wrong. I think it's USA Swimming.
Okay, sure.
They said 36 months of hormone replacement therapy.
Okay.
The NCAA said, we're not going to do that. You just have to tell us you're doing 12 months of hormone replacement therapy.
Okay.
And you just need to submit one test within 4 weeks of competition, and you're only allowed to have the testosterone levels twice that of a normal female. I believe it's 5 either nanomoles per deciliter or 5 nanograms per deciliter. And they allowed it to 10.
Ceiling?
It's a ceiling.
So you can't go past that.
You can't go but for a trans athlete, you can't go past 10.
Okay.
Which is 2 times that of a woman. So it'd be like you going into a sport. Have you ever played sports?
I have, yes.
Okay, so what sport? What's your sport?
Basketball.
Oh, basketball.
Yeah.
Okay. So, you can't find a juicer in professional basketball, right?
No.
No, of course not. They're all natural.
Yeah.
But it would be like telling LeBron James, or it would be like telling, I don't follow college basketball, but whoever's good in college basketball, it'd be like saying, okay, look, you're not allowed to do steroids. You say you're not doing them for 12 months, and then within 4 weeks, you just submit a blood test where you only have 2 times the testosterone levels of your male counterparts.
Okay.
We always talk about steroids in sports, right?
Yeah.
And how it's become easier to beat these sort of tests, and the tests become more elaborate. This is a cheat sheet to transgender males, to biological males claiming to be women, on how to cheat. We're only going to need a test within 4 weeks, and you're still allowed to have 2 times the levels.
Okay.
And even then, what's also important is, and I understand what you're saying. I guess I don't know what your position is. My position is biological males compete with biological males. Biological females compete with biological females. That was a position of even modern transgender activists until just really 2-3 years ago, because all sports are different. That's biology.
Yeah.
Now we're at a point where we're trying to make the argument that, well, if they undergo hormone replacement therapy for a year, they don't have the, and that's also not true. The medical literature, this isn't up to date with the data. They only lose about 5% of their strength. We're talking not just strength.
I mean,
we're talking about ligament strength.
It's
about 5% according to the medical literature. They lose about 5% in 12 months.
Site.
Okay, I've seen it as high as 7.
Okay.
The most legitimate study that I've seen, the most
It also
legitimate study
depends
is
what
5.
you're measuring, if, like physical strength or endurance,
Physical
or oxygen
strength,
capacity, is
muscle
another one
area,
you can- yeah.
total muscle volume, muscle density,
See, volume and density
connective
are
tissue
not
strength, for example, male
necessarily-
connective tissue strength,
yeah,
ligament
yeah.
strength, tendon strength is 80% higher, red blood cell count, VO2 max, overall lung capacity, lever arms, longer, bone density.
Yeah,
The list
yeah.
goes on and on and on. These don't
Yeah.
go away with 12 months. They don't
Sure.
even go away with 2 years.
Yeah, I mean, I would argue things like wingspan, bone density, all that stuff is the same. But like certain, rather
But you'd
than
argue
looking
bone
at-
density is the same between a male and a female?
Oh no, I was saying after you are on hormones for a while, your wingspan, things like that sort of are like your height is not necessarily going to change. Although that does happen sometimes, I think, but I don't think that's a result of
Well,
being on estrogen.
You're saying, yeah, your wingspan wouldn't change. Exactly.
Yeah.
You would still enjoy the
Yeah.
lengthened wingspan
Sure.
of being a biological male.
But I do think there are certain physical attributes that do change. Like as far as like strength is a big one. Like they'd be like how many push-ups you can do. There's studies where they'll test pre and post
It
transition.
gets lower.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it
But not that-
evens out pretty much for the most part.
Not in the studies that I've seen. No.
I guess so, yeah. And this is another one where we can just go back and forth, your word, my word. I don't really want to camp out on that, I
Right.
think we can just sort of agree to disagree.
Well, I
as
think
far
the
as
data
what
is pretty clear, and I think, look, let's say that you're correct.
Yeah.
Let's say that there are studies out there that show after a year of testosterone suppression, everything is the same. Let's assume that's correct. I don't believe so,
No.
but let's assume it's correct. Still doesn't bring us to a solution, does it?
Not a very clean one, no. But
So what are you suggesting? I'm saying that biological males compete with biological
Yeah.
males because I believe someone also needs to advocate for biological females. That's why Title IX exists.
Yeah.
Your suggestion is
My suggestion is to let trans athletes play with. So I just say let trans men compete in men's sports and let trans women compete in women's sports.
Right.
Solely
so
from a
when you
quick-
say trans men, again, you're using a gender. So you're arguing that gender and sex are the same.
no, not necessarily.
Well, because you're saying let trans men compete in
Yeah.
men's sports, let
Yeah, yeah.
trans women. What you're really saying is biological males who identify as women compete in women's sports. And sports are separated by biology. There's no getting around that. So if
There
you were
has
saying,
been, yeah, but it's not like a constant, like a law of nature or something like that that can change.
it has been a constant,
But
and
it's
for
not-
a very
it's
good
not,
reason. The
you know,
reason it's the same reason we have weight
it
classes.
can
It's the same
change.
reason we have age divisions.
It's not like gravity that you can't, you know what I mean? Like it's a construct that we can morph if we find the social utility for it. You see what I'm saying?
And what would the social utility be?
So
To upending based on sparse or non-existent clinical data that you're mentioning. What would the upside be to allowing biological males to beat
Yeah, for
biological
sure.
women?
Yeah,
Because
for
you know
sure.
it's not going the other direction. You and I both know that, right? There's the lab study and then there's the real life study. Biological women are not competing and beating men, biological
no,
men
I
in
mean,
sports.
listen,
It's only
I will-
going one
listen,
way.
Biological differences between men and women on general do exist, right? And so I'm definitely not going to argue with that. But when you bring trans people into the equation, I'm looking at it from the perspective of what is going to, it's like a harm reduction type of a perspective that I'm coming at it from. So it goes back to my earlier point, which is even if you wanted to say, okay, if biological men and biological women compete in separate sports and then it doesn't matter if you transition over or not, you have to compete with who you were biologically assigned with at birth. It still just creates the same problem where women who want to transition to men have to compete against women, and then it's not fair to the women who are getting, beat up on by this transition, this trans man
Yeah.
who is taking hormones and is taking.
Well, they shouldn't be allowed to compete.
Okay, so you're saying,
Yeah,
so
a woman.
is that your opinion?
Yes, a
Okay.
woman who is taking anabolics.
Yeah.
effectively, right?
Is transitioning to
A woman who's taking
yeah.
a woman who's taking anabolics.
Sure.
Let's boil this down to biological terms. A woman who's taking testosterone.
Sure.
No non-trans identifying woman is allowed to do that. They're banned from sport.
Okay.
It's illegal.
Okay.
Should be illegal regardless of how you identify.
Okay.
They shouldn't be allowed to beat up on women, just like a woman shouldn't be allowed to take anabolic steroids and beat up on women.
Okay. And that is a fine position to hold. It's not my position.
That's a harm reduction position. So
It
that's
is,
my
for
harm
sure.
reduction
Yeah,
position.
it is.
What's the harm reduction you're saying, your harm reduction model,
Yeah.
in allowing biological men to beat women?
I would like as many people to participate in sports as possible while still keeping, because like you said, the trans community is a fairly small one. This is not a sort of an epidemic or a pandemic like some maybe make it out to be. It's a small like.
It's not yet. No, it's not. Yeah, it's not
Sure,
yet.
it's not yet.
Because
But
it's very
I would
new.
rather not act on. And if it does change and it becomes a really big problem, then maybe we can readdress how we sort of go about this.
So let a problem that all data would indicate is likely going to happen, and even the small sample sizes that we have, allow that problem to run its course, allow it to rob women of opportunities, allow it to create concussions and broken orbital bones like we've seen in women's combat sports, because we don't know how bad it'll be yet, and then reverse course if it gets worse.
My argument would be that it is not a problem yet. Once it does become a problem, then we can address it. But as of right now, in the current moment, I don't see it as being problematic.
So I think in your harm reduction, you are failing to take into account one large group of people.
Okay.
You're taking into account a very small group of people, and I don't think you've conflated gender and sex, which is why modern gender theory is one I disagree with, because it's
Okay.
not a tenable position.
Sure.
Because everything that you have discussed is basically equating gender with sex at that point. That's the only way you can argue that people who identify a certain way should be able to compete with people who are biologically female. But let's say it's 1% of the population that's trans. Okay? In your harm reduction approach, who are you ignoring?
Well, I'm assuming from your perspective, it'd be biological women, right? Yeah. But you would have to sort of explain to me why that is the case. If it is 1% of people who are trans,
Well,
you know,
what's the purpose to sports? Why do we play
organized
sports?
competition. I mean, that's a great question. I don't know. I don't have a philosophical answer for you.
What's
I
the
mean, I'm assuming
goal
you
in
do.
sport?
To win, I'm assuming?
Yes.
Okay.
That's the only goal in
You know,
sport.
have fun along the way, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Have fun along the way.
Camaraderie.
But when we're talking about sports and high-level
Yeah.
sports like
Yeah.
NCAA, it's
Yeah.
not fun.
I mean, they
it's
want
not
to
fun
win,
to be a champion
obviously.
at that
Of
point,
course,
right? It's a very
of course.
difficult life. They've
Yes.
sacrificed a lot.
Yeah.
They've trained a lot. They've run into many complications that people who are not trying to be excellent in their field. I think we would both agree with that, right?
Yes,
it's not really a
definitely.
fun life to be an NCAA silver medalist.
mean, it
right?
takes discipline for
To be
sure.
an Olympic silver medalist and then get your ass kicked by someone who was a man 2 years ago.
Yeah.
So the purpose is to win. Now, that's why sports exist. The NCAA, right? Collegiate sports. What opportunities do those provide? Would we both agree that they're significant?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah. Scholarships, school.
Paths to careers,
Yes, definitely.
coaching.
Yeah.
Okay. So beyond the actual physical harm which can take place in certain sports, with biological men competing against women, what about all the economic harm? What about all the opportunity costs for these women who've trained their whole lives and they miss out?
Well, so
Because far more of them will be affected than transgender individuals who don't even compete in sport.
what do you mean by that?
What I mean is if we have 1% of transgender individuals right, in the population and not many of them are competing in
Yeah.
sports, we're talking about a harm reduction strategy that at the cost of all of the other women
Yeah.
in these sports who
Yeah.
are vying for these opportunities, we are acquiescing to biological males in the name of harm reduction, but it's actually probably the most harmful thing we can do for women's sports, for female sports.
I guess my argument for that would just be that, you know, you're talking about, you're framing it in a sense that like trans women are taking opportunities from biological women, I assume is the point here.
They are.
Yeah. I would just say that it's not sort of if you want to make, because I do think there is going to be harm done either way, I will agree, but I think it's it's more of a one-to-one thing. You're making it seem like biological women are going to be hurt exponentially more when it's like if a trans woman takes a biological woman's place,
Yeah.
that's a one-to-one sort of trade-off. I mean, one or the other is going to take that place of the other person. So it's just depending on who you want to favor as, and it just comes down to, I believe, like what you view it like. The women's sports thing is sort of a microcosm of the bigger sort of trends. Like
Yeah.
it pivots on.
Well, it
what your
shows that
opinion
modern
of-
gender theory can't hold water.
Oh, why is that?
Well, because I've been even at this school
Yeah.
and other schools where I said there are only two genders, right? Change my mind. And people go,
Yes.
well, no, gender is separate from sex.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go with that.
Yeah.
But now you're sitting here arguing gender and sex are interchangeable.
I wouldn't argue they're interchangeable.
Well, you are arguing that in the realm of sport.
Not necessarily. No.
Okay, then please clarify, because I just heard you say that biological males, and then you use the term trans women, which is a gender term, right?
Yes.
Trans women is not a biological
Yes.
term, that's a gender term.
Yes.
So you say people of a gender should
Yeah.
be allowed to now identify with whatever sex they choose to
I see what
compete.
you're saying now. So I would like to clarify that then.
Okay.
People who identify as men should be allowed to compete against each other. People who identify as women should be allowed to compete against each other. I make no biological
So a separate division.
distinctions there.
So a separate division then.
No, not a separate division. I just think that
Then it brings us back to the same issue. You're saying biological males who identify as trans women,
Yes.
a gender term,
Yeah.
brings us right back to the same place, should be able to compete against other people who are separated by sex. There is only an exception for the modern transgender theorist, right? Everywhere else it's separated by biology.
No.
I can't compete against women just because I don't say that I'm a woman.
Yeah.
I could tomorrow.
Yeah. Well, so one, just to that point, I don't think that is something that is really happening. Of people just being like, I'm a man, I'm just going to say I'm a woman and go compete against women, and like I don't think that is a thing that happens. I do believe it is legitimate, like people who are legitimately trying to transition who want to compete in these sports.
Well, how do you know?
Because I mean, look at Leah Thomas, look at all of the examples that you yourself have cited. I have not seen an example of like a person doing that yet. And if that does happen again, then it becomes a problem, and we figure out a way to
it
address
has happened. And again, just because it hasn't happened yet, that's the argumentum ad novitatum. That's the appeal to novelty, logical fallacy. Well, it hasn't happened
so
yet.
This isn't even because I do want to go back to the thing you were saying about the men and women, the biological.
Yes.
My
I
only
don't
point-
understand how your position. I don't understand how your position is tenable if gender and sex are separate.
So my only point that I would like to make is when you say men's and women's sports,
Yes.
I would like that to just simply mean people who identify as men, people who identify as women.
But it doesn't.
Not right now, no. But it could.
And it doesn't because of biological differences. Sports are separated due to biological
They
differences.
are right now, yes.
And there's a reason for that.
Well, I mean, not
for the
necessarily
safety of women.
'cause- well, and then it just goes back to the same argument. We kind of are going
No,
back
no,
to
it's
that
not going back to
all
the same argument. You haven't addressed it. For the safety of women.
Well, we went back and forth on the data of does it actually harm women in the sense of like, because I mean, obviously you mentioned like broken orbital bones and all that stuff in combat sports, which injuries are going to happen in the realm of, obviously an orbital bone is a pretty serious, I mean, that's a bad one, but injuries are going to happen in the realm of combat sports, citing that
Let
as
me ask
being
you this, because
dangerous
maybe
to
we're
women.
just. Do you not believe that there would be more injuries occurring in contact sports if biological men just competed, if there were no men and women's divisions? Do you honestly not believe that that would drastically increase the chances of injury?
Well, I think
Come on, we have people who are walking CTE, right? The lifespan of an O lineman is somewhere in their 40s or 50s in the NFL,
Yeah.
and these are 315, 340-pound men, and they're still having to deal with being hit. Do you honestly believe that if we didn't have men and women's division, that a female quarterback being sacked, that a female lineman, you really don't think that there would be an increase in dramatic injuries?
Oh, no, there would, yeah,
Okay,
definitely.
good.
But I would like to note that, like, obviously,
It hasn't
of
happened
course.
yet.
Well, of course, there is, differences in men and women, like a big linebacker versus small. But I would like to point out that whenever you do talk about sort of biological differences between,
Why do you do this?
Sorry, yeah, I don't know. But whenever you talk about,
Well, do you mean to do this, or was that accidental?
let's not read too deeply into it. I don't think it's really anything.
Well,
that
no, hold on
much
a second.
deeper.
Is it because I am saying I think it matters. Biological males.
Well,
but you did this.
Yeah, so let me get to the point. Is that when you do talk about biological distinctions, what you're really saying are physical, chemical distinctions between people, right? Like, I could say that, a 6'6", 230-pound like linebacker versus a college, like a freshman of the same age who's like 5'5" and like 180 pounds or whatever, is not going to be a fair matchup, right? But they're both men. But when you say biological differences, you're talking about physical, competitive advantages that people have regardless of biology. Regardless of what they are assigned at birth, as far as their
Regardless of
gender
what
goes.
biology determines them to be at birth.
But it determines them to an extent. But
Hold on a
obviously,
second. Do you believe that
there's-
biological male and biological female is assigned at birth, or do you believe that the gender assigned at birth is what can be changed? Because this is very new. You need to understand this.
Oh, yeah.
The students I spoke with 2 years ago
Yeah.
at this school, the professors, never in their wildest dreams would have said biological sex assigned at birth.
Yeah.
Are you suggesting that sex is being assigned rather than being intrinsic? Because that's a
No.
whole new thing.
The chromosomes that you are born with are the ones that you have, and it's not a socially constructed thing.
Okay.
You have those chromosomes. It determines a lot about your physical makeup and stuff like that. But, and obviously there's intersex people and it's a spectrum and all that, and it's not a binary, but it is intrinsic. It is biological. You
Yeah.
can't, just say that you don't have these certain chromosomes, but I don't think that's the argument people are making. So that would be my,
Well, you don't think what is the argument? Every single person in this country thinks that it's unfair for biological males to compete against biological females.
Oh, no,
regardless of how they
not in the
identify.
realm of competition. I'm just simply saying, I don't think anybody is making the argument that you are not born with chromosomes that give you certain, like that
But then
differentiate.
do you understand, though, that
biology.
then your position is untenable? Because you're
how
saying
so?
there is something that is innate. There is something that is intrinsic,
Yeah,
right? There is
sure.
something that's immutable.
Yeah.
But we need to throw that out the window as it relates to sports and go by gender, which is societal.
I see your point, but the problem is that
Sports are not separated by how you identify. They are separated by immutable physical characteristics for the reason of safety and fairness in competition.
So-
can we agree on that? That's
Well-
why they're separated by biology.
I might agree, but if you're going off of specifically, so your definition of why they're separated is immutable physical characteristics
Yes.
for people's safety. I would just
And
make the
fairness.
argument, and fairness, right? I would just make the argument, okay, so we should have smaller men and women compete against each other, and women who are at a better physical, because you would acknowledge
we have
that.
Division 1 versus Division 3, and we have weight classes. Perfect example.
Sure, yeah,
Yes,
exactly.
I agree.
But you would not cross the biological lines to like the gender, the sex.
No, because the difference is so vast.
I mean, not for everybody though, right? I mean, because if you
Yes,
want to make the
it
argument that it
absolutely
is for the safety of people,
It absolutely
there's
is.
a
It's
lot of women who
unbelievably.
could
The
beat
gap
up.
is so much larger between men and women. It's not even close. I mean, you can look at again, when you're looking at just Leah Thomas as a
Yeah.
recent example,
Yeah.
talking about 503rd, I believe, in the 200 or 500 something place,
Yeah.
if that time were posted by when he was still competing
Yeah.
as a man, not even top 800 in the 500.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a huge, and you're talking about winning
Yeah.
one of them, placing fifth in another. It's not even close.
Yeah.
I mean, even just, do you think Serena Williams and Venus Williams, you think they would do well against top guys?
Oh no, I should actually clarify
Do you think
that.
they would even do well against middling guys?
I'm not sure about middling guys, but I will say.
Do you think
at
they would
a
do
high
well against
level-
not good tennis
At a
players?
high level, there is a complete difference between men and women as far
Yeah.
as like physical advantages.
My point is the best female athlete
Yeah.
in the world aren't even close to middling to low-end male athletes.
That's a. Can you substantiate that claim? That's a
Yeah,
pretty,
Venus and Serena Williams, they played tennis against a guy who was ranked 204th, I
Yeah.
believe, and he beat both of them in one afternoon.
It's kind of an
And he was a
anecdotal-
drunk.
I feel like that's an anecdotal maybe point to make, right?
It's not
I mean,
an anecdote. You just asked me, can I point to an example?
Yeah.
And then
Well,
the
evidence.
empirical would be, okay, so the empirical would be the times that I just gave you for Leah Thomas, right? I can give you other examples like Mary Gregory in powerlifting, the squat. The world record female squat versus male squat is a 400-pound difference. When you're talking about men in the same weight class who are competing against each other, you're talking about infinitesimal, right, amounts of weight. You're talking about 2-3 pounds. You're talking about the world record deadlift going up, if you're lucky, by 4 pounds, maybe every 2 years, right? That's the level of competition.
Yeah.
The difference between a man and a woman is over 400 pounds. I just gave you the times, right, the empirical. As far as the swim times, you could actually look at every single swim time, track time, right, decathlon time. You could look at every single shot put. You could look at every single long jump, high jump. You could look at the verticals. You can look at connective tissue strength, like I said, which is about 80% higher in men. So you can look at all those. That's the empirical.
Sure.
And I'm giving you an example of
Sure.
the two best female tennis players who have ever existed were both just absolutely washed in an afternoon by a drunken 200-something ranked guy.
Yeah, yeah,
Come on.
so-
it's a big difference.
Well, yeah, I mean, I would say in
Let's not do
high
the college
level
thing. This is a big, big
competition-
difference.
Yeah, yeah, in a high level competition.
No,
I will
high-level women
totally-
against low-level men. It's not even close.
Well, and to be honest, I don't know if that super matters.
The
to
best female athletes in the world get routed by adolescent boys. Do you know that? The world women's, right? The world female soccer champions, they lose almost always to high school boy teams.
So I don't know if that's super. I feel like we're kind of getting off on a separate path here as far as like.
Well, no,
what-
I'm just addressing your argument where you said,
Yeah.
well, the difference is depending. And I said, no, it's such a huge chasm
Yeah.
between biological males and females that that's the reason they're separated. I was addressing your point.
I would still make the argument that the chasm is not as big as you make it out to be.
Okay.
But my word against your word, I don't want to look at anything. I would argue that it is not as big as, because obviously
Sure.
I asked for evidence, and there is a lot of, I'm sure, specific examples.
Assuming that I'm
the
not
Williams
lying.
sisters. Oh, I don't think you're lying. I think all of those examples that you gave are very well, this could be true. But
the
again,
empirical and the anecdotal, right? You recognize that I gave you the empirical, what can be measured in a lab, what can be measured as far as times across the board.
Yeah,
And then the
yeah.
anecdotal of the best female athletes competing against middling drunken men and still losing.
yeah, and
female
I'm
soccer
fairly
teams.
more confident that the lab, the numbers that you give are not totally accurate.
Yeah. Okay.
And then as far as like the individual cases, they are individual cases, so I'm not going to, you know.
So we'll discount the
turn around
empirical and discount the anecdotal.
I
And
would
now it's the
discount-
broad and now it's the brutal and nothing is safe, Isaac.
yeah, that's good. Yeah, that was a good framing you just did. But I would say that I would discount the anecdotal. Yes, I will acknowledge that. But the empirical, I do believe, like I have seen a lot of evidence that points towards my point of view. on
What if
this.
you're wrong?
If I'm wrong, then I would be okay with it because I feel like I would have at least tried to protect the rights of all people to play sports.
Except for women.
Unlike you, well, I mean, you were the one who said that you would not let trans men compete in sports.
You mean women? You mean biological
Who are
females who are taking
transitioning
drugs?
over. Yes.
For the same reason? Yeah, you just can't take anabolic steroids in the sport.
Yeah.
Now, if you're advocating that we should allow anabolic steroids in sport, fine. How about it?
No, I'm allowed. No, I'm advocating that. Like, well,
Which,
I
by
mean,
the way, I'm not even necessarily against.
yeah. Oh, you're not.
I'm not even necessarily against it.
Yeah,
No, I think
yeah.
either we need to have really, really strict testing across the board, or no testing and let the games begin.
Okay. So just so I
Is that reasonable? It's got to be one or the other. We have shitty testing right now that people can bypass.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, well, honestly, I don't have a super like hard and fast opinion on that specifically.
Oh, I have very strong opinions on that.
It would probably be a lot of fun to see a bunch of roided athletes go up against each other, but
Especially sports like baseball. Who
oh
gives,
yeah,
who cares?
I mean, I don't watch baseball.
You
so
just
that
want to
would
hit
be-
them. You want to watch them hit home runs. They're not
Yeah.
hitting anybody.
I would watch baseball if that was the case. So
Yeah.
I think you won me over on that.
Okay, all right,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
fine. Baseball would be less boring if we
yeah.
just let them roid.
Yeah, exactly. You know,
It's
what?
like the Tour de France. Did you see that? The Tour de France, they just excoriated, Lance Armstrong.
Oh.
And I don't remember the number, because now they can retroactively go and test the samples.
Really?
Right, with modern testing methods.
Yeah.
And they tested all of the other guys who he beat, who sued him and were complaining, and they had to go down to like number, I think it was 14 to find someone who was clean. And
course.
now none of the records are being set. They were all
That's,
set a few years ago. So no, it makes a big difference.
Yeah.
And by the way, you
Yeah.
know what's interesting about that? The difference of a man on steroids, picture the most jacked out dude, on the bodybuilding stage, does not enjoy anywhere near the exponential hormonal advantage that a male enjoys over a female. Arnold in his prime does not have a hormonal advantage over you that you do over her or her or her. It's that big of a chasm.
I could probably concede to that. I think that's probably maybe true. I don't think it sways because I guess my question to you would just be, how do you address like the Leah Thomases and all of the like transgender athletes who want to compete? Your opinion is strictly, just so I'm clear, biological.
I'll
men
give you two.
Okay.
Okay. So one is, and you're not going to like it, and you're going to think I'm a dick. You were competing as a man 2 years ago. You continue to compete as a man.
Okay.
Okay? That's the only fair way to do it. Or, if I go along with the idea, which you have presented, and your peers here have presented, and your professors have presented, that gender and sex are different, then you have to change it based on gender and create a third division. Or let me ask you this, actually, it might help. How many genders are there?
How many genders are there?
More than two?
I don't know.
More than three?
Why does it matter? I guess is my question.
Like, then you have to just create as many divisions as there are genders. So one of those two. You compete based on biology like we always have because it's what's safe, it's what's fair, it's what protects women. Or if we want to go with sort of modern gender theory, which I don't agree with, but I would allow for it in sport where, I think Facebook has you up to 50-something genders now,
Sure.
it may even be higher than that.
Sure.
Great, 50-something sports divisions.
Okay.
Compete in those against your gender.
It feels a bit like hyperbole to me because I don't feel like there is a cry for that for there to be 50. Like obviously,
No, of course there isn't. They want to beat up on women.
Yeah, but I'm saying I'm addressing your point that you're making currently, which is that I don't think that is an issue or a problem or anybody is
Okay,
calling
create a
for that
third
to
one.
happen.
Create a third one where all the people can take all the hormones they want.
Is this
cross-sex hormone.
your solution for the problem? Or
It's one of two. My solution is you go with biology because sports have been separated by biology.
Yeah.
If we need to protect trans athletes, I don't really know what that necessarily means. I don't know how they're going to be harmed by not being allowed to dominate women at a swim meet. Create a third division.
I mean, I would argue trans people do get they're the target of hate crimes fairly frequently, more so than your average person.
It's not a hate crime to not let them compete.
Oh no, I'm not talking about not letting them compete. I'm just talking about hate crimes in general. if you want to talk about the protection of trans people.
But how are you protecting them by putting women, biological females at risk? I don't see that as a form of protection.
Well, so I think what it all kind of comes down to, and this is why I think that at the end of the day, women's sports like are sort of and this is not me sort of conceit because I still do, but at the end of the day, it's very important, I think, that you affirm somebody's gender identity as they identify with it. So I think it is harmful for the trans athletes to be told, like, if they identify as male, that they are not.
Yeah.
And so I see that.
You just said male. That's sex. That's not gender.
Oh, sorry. Whatever is the gender.
No, you
term.
can't keep it straight, can you?
I mean, it's. I will.
Because it's silly. It's a little silly, isn't it? When we get down to a point for you to say, you said trans men before. Hold on, this is, and I want to wrap this up with here, because this isn't a gotcha. This is me trying to. I don't fully understand your argument.
And then as long as I can respond after, you can.
Well, because we do have to get going. So I think you just presented your kind of closing sentiment here, but it matters because the very first thing you did when you sat down. Do you remember what it was that you said?
I do not.
I said you said you had a problem with the wording.
Yes.
And the problem that you had with the wording was that I kept saying biological males.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And you said we should use the term trans women. Right?
Yeah.
But right now you just reverted back to saying they identify as males. So you yourself, the biggest problem that you had when you sat down here.
It wasn't the biggest problem. It was the first thing I said, but it wasn't the biggest.
We said that your primary issue was with the wording.
I don't think it was primary. I don't think that's what I said.
Okay, it's the first issue. It's,
like
it's the first
chronologically.
grievance that you issued.
Sure. Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
But right now, you just committed the same sin.
I don't think so. I mean, maybe I got my words mixed up, but I'm not going to sit here and claim that like.
You didn't get your words mixed up. You were being very articulate. And I think you've been articulate this whole time. I think we disagree.
Well, thank you. Yes.
But I really do think that you've been articulate, and I think you've been. I mean, you're probably the kind of. I don't know. You're probably not old enough now to say I would grab a beer with you. We could sit there and
I'm
talk.
21, so
okay,
yeah.
all right. Well, sometime we could sit down and grab a beer.
I would love it,
but you just did the same thing, and that's my point with this. I just don't think there's any intellectual consistency to it whatsoever. You can't say, well, the term trans woman, because it's gender, it's different from sex, and then say they're allowed to compete with biological females. And then you've done this several times, you just said who identify as female or identify as male.
Yeah.
And that's my point, is it's an untenable position. And I don't think it's about protecting trans women, to use your term now, see what I did there. I think ultimately you need to look at the consequences that harm biological women, and they deserve those same opportunities.
Yeah. My final point, I'm not going to sit here and claim that the language is not confusing or that all this stuff is not very new and like uncharted territory. I am not the most educated person in this. Just because I do not understand something fully does not mean I should dismiss the validity of it. Because obviously there are a group of people who, like, this is very important to them. And just because,
and there's an even larger group of people to whom it's important, and that's biological females.
Sure. No, I'm just talking about the trans issue specifically.
Yeah.
Like.
But why not take into account biological females? That's my point. You don't seem to be concerned with them.
Listen, I'm not even addressing the sports thing. I'm addressing what you were talking about with the language issue, which is that I am, still learning a lot of stuff about this. I am not the most educated person on it. The language is confusing. It's hard to integrate. But at the end of the day, the complaints that people are levying are valid, and it's something that I think people should approach with an open mind and just try their best to understand, rather than shut it down immediately. I think that's kind of where I stand on it. Just because it is something that is new to you and maybe seems nonsensical does not inherently disqualify it from being valid.
It's not new to me. It's something I've studied pretty extensively,
Sure.
and I do believe it's nonsensical.
Okay, yeah, and I don't.
And I would certainly say, if not the term nonsensical, it is absolutely untenable.
Okay.
It's an untenable position to say that sex is biological, gender is societal, and biological male should be allowed to compete against biological females. It's an untenable position. But I appreciate you sitting down. But Isaac,
yeah.
Isaac, thank you very much, Isaac.
Well, look at that. I don't find the arguments particularly compelling, but respect genuinely to Isaac for sitting down with me and making his case like an adult. Which reminds me, I wanted to ask you, have you had this discussion with people in real life, and which arguments have you heard that were the most compelling as it relates to biological males competing in women's sports? Just comment below. And if you like what you see, hit the subscription button or consider tuning in Monday through Thursday, 10 a.m. Eastern, for the full Daily Show, live. That's 10 a.m. Eastern, live. And I mean, yes, live. That's actually live, uncensored. Back to the topic at hand. Other times with these discussions, you have to realize that some people have no interest in conversing on these topics openly and honestly, like this guy.
I mean, what's the point of sports?
To win.
According to experts, 1.7% of the population is born with intersex traits.
That's from amnesty.org.
I mean, yeah, I mean, I can just say keep.
Can you hold that up to the camera? Can you hold that up to the camera? Hold on a second. Let me actually. Hold on a second. Let you know.
So I'm gonna
You
give
have
up
to
my
have the
seat
female
now.
athletes.
Is there a woman who would like to speak to him?
And that miracle, my friends, is coming tomorrow. So if you want to see more, smash the like button, comment below, bookmark the channel. Come back tomorrow at 10 a.m. Eastern, just like every other day.
Hey everybody, if you liked the clip you just saw, go ahead and smash that like button. Smash it. Also, feel free to go ahead and share it. Why not share it? If people you like or you don't like.
Landau smash.
Landau smash. Crowder smash.
Black Widow takes a smashing.